Have you ever thought that taking a daily bath is just a normal, healthy habit? Most of us grew up believing that being clean means being cared for. But here's something surprising. After the age of 70, daily bathing might actually harm your body more than help it. Sounds backwards, doesn't it? But today, we're going to gently question this long-held routine through the lens of Buddhist wisdom. Not to fight aging, but to meet it with tenderness, understanding, and deep compassion. You'll hear a story about a grandmother whose life changed when she stopped bathing daily, and why a Buddhist monk chose not to bathe for days, yet remained the embodiment of clarity and calm. And toward the end, I'll share a quiet paradox, one that even seasoned practitioners of the Dharma often overlook, yet it holds the power to soften how we treat our aging bodies. If any part of you feels tired of keeping up, come sit with me a while. Let's breathe. Let's listen. And if this feels meaningful to you, I'd love for you to subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a softer way of being. Let's walk this path together, slowly, kindly, mindfully. The aging body, a temple that needs gentle care. There's a strange moment that arrives quietly with age. One day, you reach for the mirror and realize the skin staring back is no longer what it used to be. You touch it, and it no longer springs back as quickly. A bruise appears where none should have. A gentle itch becomes a daily companion. And suddenly, what once felt like armor now feels more like parchment. Weathered, soft, and thin. I used to think this change was something to fight. That if I just bathed more, scrubbed harder, used the right cream, I could reclaim what time had stolen. But time is not a thief. Time is a teacher. And the skin we carry through the years is not a burden. It is a journal. Each line, each freckle, each softened fold is a verse in the poem of our lives. You see, the skin, this outer shell, this silent companion, ages with us. By the time we reach our 70s, the transformation is profound. Science tells us that the epidermis, the outermost layer, thins out. Collagen and elastin, those marvelous proteins that once gave us bounce and glow, dwindle like the final embers of a fire at dusk. The sebaceous glands, those tiny oil factories, slow their work. Our skin begins to dry like leaves in late autumn. It loses its natural sheen, its protective film, and grows more vulnerable. Not just to touch, but to air, to temperature, to water. But science isn't the only teacher here. Buddhism, too, has long whispered a gentle truth. This body, miraculous as it is not permanent. It is not meant to stay untouched by time. The Buddha reminded us that all conditioned things are subject to decay. And in that truth lies a subtle beauty, a chance to soften our expectations and instead bring loving awareness to what remains. I remember a story a dear elder once shared with me. She had lived a life of rhythm and ritual. Each morning before the sun rose, she would bathe, perfume her skin, and prepare for the day. It was her form of meditation. But in her 80s, as arthritis took hold, the daily bath became a battle. She felt ashamed at first, skipping a day, then two, until one morning, her granddaughter came close, kissed her cheek, and said, "Grandma, you smell like stories." That moment changed her. She stopped scrubbing to erase time and instead began to honor the years written in her skin. Skin like old silk, precious, delicate, worn not with shame, but with reverence. That's how I've come to see it now. Think of the robes worn by monks. Simple, sometimes frayed, but rich with history and meaning. Our bodies, too, are our robes in this life. They deserve not harshness, but gentleness, especially in these later chapters. And gentleness isn't just an idea, it's a practice. Let's step back for a moment. Imagine a lotus pond just before sunrise. The water is still, the light faint. A single lotus floats, its petals just beginning to loosen. It doesn't rush to open. It unfolds slowly, with the patience of someone who knows there's no need to prove anything. Our bodies, too, need that kind of patience now. No rush. No pressure to look a certain way or be as resilient as they once were. Just care. Just presence. In Buddhism, the body is seen as a vessel for practice. Not something to worship, but something to steward. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, one of the key teachings is mindfulness of the body. Not to control it, but to observe it, to care for it, to understand its impermanence and beauty. So as our bodies age, and as the skin becomes more fragile, we're being offered a deeper lesson. To soften the way we care for ourselves. I want to ask you something gently. When was the last time you looked at your body not with judgment, but with gratitude? When was the last time you touched your own hands and remembered how many meals they've made, how many embraces they've held, how many days they've endured? We often spend our youth striving for the external, clear skin, firm bodies, polished looks. But in our later years, the invitation shifts. The body is no longer a billboard for approval. It becomes a temple for reflection. And temples are not meant to be scrubbed raw. They are places we enter slowly, with reverence, removing our shoes, bowing in silence. So what does this mean practically? It means hot water, once comforting, can now strip the skin of its remaining oils. It means foamy soaps and vigorous scrubbing, while satisfying in youth, can tear the fragile layers of an aging epidermis. It means that sometimes less really is more. A warm, damp cloth, a gentle touch, a shift in how we see cleanliness, not as a war against the body, but as a dialogue with it. I met a retired carpenter last year. He was 78, still strong in spirit, but his skin bore the mark of decades under the sun and sawdust. He told me, "I used to wash the dirt off every day. Now, I just rinse the memory of it." He laughed after saying that, a soft, belly-deep laugh, and yet there was a depth to his words. He had learned that cleanliness was no longer about scrubbing off yesterday, but about soothing what remains today. Our culture often glorifies youth, but Buddhist wisdom reminds us, the creased face, the gentle hands, the slower pace, these are not flaws. They are the natural rhythm of life, the ripening of the fruit, not its decay. And the way we treat our skin, this soft container of spirit, should reflect that understanding. This chapter of life invites a softer kind of self-love. Not the kind advertised in bright packaging, but the quiet, faithful kind. The kind that wraps a towel around shivering shoulders and whispers, "You're doing just fine." The kind that replaces harsh soaps with warm oils and long baths with mindful cleansing. The kind that touches each scar with a story and each wrinkle with awe. As I sit here sharing these thoughts with you, I think of my own mother. Her skin, once golden and taut, now folds like rice paper. And yet, I have never seen anyone more radiant. She no longer bathes daily, but she lights incense every morning, wipes her face gently, brushes her hair slowly. And in those acts, she is more beautiful than ever because she is at peace. So if you are in your 70s, or you love someone who is, I invite you to consider this shift. Perhaps bathing less is not about doing less, but loving more. Honoring the body, not exhausting it. Treating it like sacred ground. Let go of the idea that you must be spotless to be whole. You are already whole. The wear and weather of your skin do not subtract from your worth. They speak of endurance, of love lived and loss grieved, of seasons survived. And if your body now feels more like silk than armor, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. Can you feel it? In the air around you? That hush of gentleness? That sense of being held? It's what arises when we stop trying to return to who we were and begin to bless who we are. Not perfect, not polished, just precious, just enough, just this breath. 2. When clean becomes too much, the hidden harm of daily bathing. I used to believe that being clean meant being cared for, that the scent of soap, the steam of hot water, and the ritual of scrubbing the body were signs of dignity, discipline, even love. Maybe you grew up with the same belief where cleanliness wasn't just about health, but about respect. But what if I told you that for the aging body, that same habit, once nourishing, could quietly turn into harm? Let me share a story. Her name was Mrs. Lean. She lived just a few doors down from the small Buddhist center where I sometimes helped with morning tea. She was 83, small in stature, with a voice like soft cotton and a smile that always arrived before her words. Every morning, without fail, she would wake before sunrise and bathe. Hot water, scented soap, a thorough scrub. It was how she began her day for over 60 years. Even when her hands began to tremble, even when her skin began to peel. One day, I noticed her sleeves were always pulled down, even on warm days. When I gently asked why, she hesitated, then slowly rolled them back. Her forearms were covered in thin red welts, tiny tears and cracks in her skin that looked painful just to look at. "It stings," she admitted, "but at least I feel clean." That moment stayed with me, because I saw something deeper than the wounds. What I saw was a quiet devotion to habit, a belief that to be clean was to be good. But no one had told her that aging skin isn't like the skin of youth. That hot water, so soothing once, now strips away the oils that keep our skin intact. That scented soaps, especially the foamy, fragrant kind, disrupt the skin's natural pH and make it prone to rashes, tears, even infections. That what once was care had slowly become harm. Aging skin is like rice paper left under the sun, beautiful but easy to tear. This protective barrier weakens. The sebaceous glands that once gifted us with natural oils become sluggish. The sweat glands quiet, and what's left behind is a surface that needs protecting, not polishing. But Mrs. Lean's story is not rare. It's everywhere, in the unspoken routines of millions of elders around the world who were taught, just like us, that daily washing is a virtue. We rarely question it, because routine feels safe. And in a world that changes so quickly, habits become our anchors. But here's the Buddhist truth I've come to embrace. Attachment, even to good things, can still cause suffering. The Buddha taught not just about letting go of craving, but about letting go of fixed views, even the ones that seem harmless, like the idea that more bathing equals better hygiene. In the Dhammapada, there's a line that goes, "Drop by drop the water pot fills." Likewise, the wise one, gathering little by little, fills oneself with good. But it works in reverse, too. Harm can come not as a tidal wave, but as a steady drip, day after day, bath after bath, until the body quietly cries for relief. I think about Mrs. Lean often now. She eventually replaced her morning bath with a warm towel wipe down, a touch of natural oil on her arms, and a few minutes of quiet breathing by the window instead of steaming water. She still felt clean. But more than that, she looked calm, peaceful, like a woman no longer battling her own body. Her skin healed, slowly, but the bigger healing was inside. And maybe that's what this lesson is really about. Not just what we do to our bodies, but how we listen to them. In our youth, our bodies obey us. But in age, they begin to whisper their own needs. Will we pause long enough to hear them? I imagine now a different kind of morning ritual. Not one of scrubbing, but of reverence. A gentle cloth passed slowly over the skin, like a monk polishing an old wooden altar. The scent of warm water, not boiling steam. A little oil rubbed into tired feet, not with urgency, but with gratitude. The same sense of dignity, just expressed through gentleness, not friction. There's a lotus pond I used to visit at a monastery tucked in the hills. At dawn, you could watch the petals slowly open, not because something forced them, but because the sun simply arrived. Our care should be like that morning light, warm, patient, enough. And yes, we all want to feel fresh, clean, presentable. But true cleanliness begins inside, with intention, with awareness, with kindness. The outer acts should match the inner care. When we learn to let go of outdated routines, we don't lose something, we gain something more tender, more real. You may wonder, what about odor? What about hygiene? These are valid concerns, but they have gentle answers. A spot clean with a warm cloth, changing into fresh, breathable clothing, using a natural mist or a little deodorant. These can be more than enough, especially when paired with rest, hydration, and self-respect. What we need now is not more harshness, but more wisdom. And wisdom often means saying, "This no longer serves me. This habit, though it was right once, may now be too much." And that's okay. Just as the trees shed their leaves when the time is right, not with grief, but with grace, so too can we release the habits that no longer nourish us. Not in anger, not in fear, but in trust. Trust that less can be more, that stillness can be cleansing, that gentleness can be strength. So maybe today is a good day to ask, not just what makes me feel clean, but what makes me feel cared for. And if your body is tired, if your skin is asking for relief, if your soul is ready for a slower kind of ritual, maybe that's your invitation. To let the old ways soften, to trust that you are already enough, to begin again, not with more, but with less, with kindness and with love. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that you were never dirty in the first place. Just a little too harsh with a body that has always done its best to carry you. Through every season, through every sorrow, through every sacred ordinary day. Would you like me to continue with the next chapter? Or offer visual suggestions for this one first? 3. The quiet power of less. When bathing less becomes a gift. I used to think that doing more meant caring more. More effort, more discipline, more routine. It made me feel like I was doing the right thing, like I was staying ahead of time's slow erosion. But over the years, I've learned something gently humbling. Sometimes doing less is the most loving thing we can do, for our bodies, for our spirits, for the people we care about. Especially when it comes to how we care for the aging body. There's something deeply ingrained in many of us, this belief that frequent bathing is not just a matter of hygiene, but of dignity. Clean equals respectable, and so we push through the fatigue. We brave the slippery tiles. We endure the stinging soap, all in the name of staying clean, of staying presentable. But science, and maybe even more so, wisdom, is beginning to show us a different path, a softer path. Not long ago, I visited a care home where many of the residents were in their 80s and 90s. One woman there, Ms. Evelyn, had skin so thin and transparent you could see the faint web of her veins beneath the surface, like river lines on an old map. She'd bathed every single day until the age of 79. Habit, she said, like brushing your teeth. You just do it. But after a few painful falls and an infection that left her bedridden for weeks, the nurses gently encouraged her to bathe less. She was hesitant at first, afraid she'd smell, that she'd feel unclean. But something surprising happened. Her skin began to heal. The tiny cracks that once refused to close began to knit together. The persistent itch that kept her up at night faded. Her body softened, not in weakness, but in peace. She looked at me one morning and said, "I feel like my skin is breathing again." I'll never forget the way she smiled when she said it. Not big or showy, just content. Studies back this up. The New England Journal of Medicine and other reputable sources have found that seniors who bathe just 2 or 3 times a week experience fewer skin tears, fewer infections, and fewer hospitalizations due to complications like cellulitis. Less bathing preserves the skin's fragile barrier, keeping in what should stay in and keeping out what must stay out. But beyond the science, I think there's something even more meaningful here, something deeply spiritual. Buddhism teaches us about the middle way, not clinging to extremes, not swinging wildly between indulgence and deprivation, but walking the path of balance, of wisdom, of just enough. And this act of bathing less with intention is an embodiment of that middle way. It's not about neglect. It's not about letting go of care. It's about aligning our actions with what the body truly needs, not what habit or culture demands. In a way, it reminds me of the lotus. Have you ever watched a lotus bloom? Not in time-lapse or on screen, but in real life. It's quiet, patient. The flower doesn't force its way open. It doesn't scrub its petals clean of mud. It just rises, gently, from the depths, clean, untouched, even as its roots remain buried in the mire. There's a reason the Buddha chose the lotus as a symbol, because it shows us that purity doesn't come from scrubbing, comes from unfolding, from letting be, from rising with care, not violence. And so maybe, like the lotus, we don't need to scour our bodies each day. Maybe we need to tend to them gently, trusting that less effort, offered with more presence, brings deeper nourishment. You might be wondering, what does less look like? Practically, for some, it means bathing 2 or 3 times a week instead of daily. For others, it's using a warm cloth to clean the areas that truly need attention. Underarms, groin, feet on off days. For others still, especially those with mobility challenges, It means finding joy in simple rituals like washing the face each morning or massaging the hands with warm oil in the evening. Less bathing doesn't mean less hygiene. It means a different kind of hygiene, one rooted in respect, in awareness, in balance. There's something touching about watching someone care for their body with gentleness. I once watched a Buddhist nun tend to her own aging mother. She didn't rush. She didn't scrub. She simply soaked a cloth in warm jasmine water, whispered loving words, and moved slowly, her hands like prayer. It wasn't just washing. It was devotion. And maybe that's what we're being invited into now. Not efficiency, but intimacy. Not perfection, but presence. This isn't just about water or soap. It's about how we relate to the body in this new season of life. Can we release the idea that the body is a project to fix? Can we see it instead as a sacred space to honor? Because the older body is not broken, it's ripened. And like all ripened things, it bruises more easily. But it also carries more sweetness. And maybe what it needs most now is not to be scrubbed clean, but to be held gently, like a fruit that's almost ready to fall from the tree. I think about Evelyn again, about how she hums now during her sponge baths, how she asks for lavender oil on her wrists, how she says she feels more human now that she doesn't dread the exhausting task of bathing every day. That's what we're after. Not just clean skin, but peaceful skin. Skin that doesn't sting or crack or burn. Skin that feels safe to live in. So if you're watching this and you've been feeling that old tug, that voice that says, you have to bathe daily or you're not doing it right, maybe it's time to gently thank that voice and let it go. Like autumn leaves falling from a branch that no longer needs to carry them. Let it go. Let your care evolve. Let your body lead. And let yourself be surprised by how good it feels to do just enough. And no more. The Lotus teaches us this. It doesn't rise every day to scrub itself clean. It simply opens. Gently, silently, radiantly. Maybe you can too. Would you like me to continue with the next section now? Or offer matching image direction for this chapter first? 4. What really hurts us? It's the slipping, not the soiling. It wasn't the first time I had heard a story like that, but it never gets easier to witness. A soft knock on my neighbor's door had turned into a siren. Mr. Tan, 82, had fallen in the bathroom. One moment he was reaching for a towel. The next, his world had turned sideways. A small slip, a slick floor, and suddenly a broken hip, a hospital stay, and a long stretch of recovery that never quite returned him to who he was before. His smile came back eventually, but not his stride. I sat with him a few weeks later as he slowly sipped ginger tea on his porch, the sunlight resting gently on the thin skin of his hands. It was just a shower, he said quietly, with a tone that carried both disbelief and regret. I was just trying to stay clean. There was something about the way he said that, just a shower, that lingered in my heart long after I left. Because we don't often question these small things, these routines. We don't realize that the most ordinary moment of care can suddenly become the thing that takes us out of rhythm, out of independence, out of ourselves. As we age, the body becomes less forgiving. Muscle mass naturally decreases. Balance becomes a delicate dance. Bones grow more fragile, reflexes slower. And the bathroom, that small, tiled chamber of steam and silence, can become one of the most dangerous rooms in the house. The statistics are sobering. 1 in 4 adults over 65 falls each year. And among those falls, the bathroom is one of the most common sights. Slick tiles, slippery tubs, low lighting, sudden fatigue, all the ingredients for an accident. And often all it takes is a single misstep. But it's not just the injury that hurts. It's what comes after. The fear, the shrinking of one's world, the quiet retreat from independence. I've seen strong, spirited elders become hesitant and withdrawn, not from aging itself, but from the trauma of one fall. Plants doubt, in the body, in the mind, in the simple act of moving forward. We spend so much time focused on keeping ourselves clean, but perhaps what's really sacred is keeping ourselves upright, mobile, free, still able to open the door, walk to the kitchen, sit beneath a tree and sip tea without trembling. This is where mindfulness, the quiet jewel of Buddhist practice, becomes more than a meditation cushion concept. It becomes a survival tool. The Buddha spoke often of mindfulness, sati, as the art of being present moment by moment. And in our daily rituals, it means slowing down. Not rushing into the shower because it's 7 a.m. and we always shower at 7. Not standing on one foot in a slippery tub, balancing like we used to. Not bending over to scrub our feet when our knees no longer wish to bend. It means pausing, feeling, choosing the next movement with care, not habit. It means asking a question that, in our youth, might have felt silly. Is this safe for me today? I once spent an afternoon at a monastery where the elderly monks bathed using a basin and a wooden stool. They dip a ladle into warm water, gently pour it over their shoulders, and then use a soft cloth to clean, inch by inch, breath by breath. There was something almost sacred about it. Not rushed, not aggressive, just present. One monk smiled and said, "The body prefers kindness over speed," and I believe that. I see it every time a senior transitions from a standing shower to a seated one, or from daily bathing to 3 times a week. I see it when a grab bar is installed beside the tub, or when a non-slip mat replaces a beautiful but treacherous tile. I see it when the need to feel fresh is balanced with the need to feel safe. And more than that, I feel it in the sighs of relief, the shoulders that drop, the quiet pride of someone who says, "I bathed today, and it didn't scare me." There's a humility in adapting, a quiet wisdom in letting go of old routines to honor the body's present needs. We're not losing something when we stop showering every day. We're gaining something else: safety, rest, dignity, trust. I once helped an old friend switch to sponge baths after a fall. First, she hated it. "It feels like giving up," she said. But over time, something softened. She began to light a candle during her cleansing, play soft music, use scented oils on her skin. "It feels like ceremony now," she told me, eyes glimmering. "Like I'm still me, just slower." And that's the heart of it, isn't it? We're still us, just slower. And that's okay. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stay clean? Maybe it's, how do I stay safe while honoring my body's truth? And the answer might look like this: a cushioned chair in the shower, a handheld sprayer instead of overhead water, a basin and cloth beside the bed, a towel warmed on the radiator, someone trusted nearby, not out of weakness, but as a loving witness. We don't need to scrub to be good. We don't need to prove that we're still capable by doing things the way we used to. We need to protect the body, not just for cleanliness, but for movement, for independence, for life. The mud may cling to the feet of the traveler, but the journey still matters more. So if today you're rethinking your routine, not because you're lazy or careless, but because you're wise, bless you. That's courage. That's presence. That's mindfulness in action. There's no shame in doing things differently. There's only grace in listening closely to the needs of this temple we walk in, this aging, sacred, wondrous body. Let it be steady. Let it be safe. Let it move through this world, not rushed, not broken, but held, cared for, and respected. Would you like me to continue with the next section? Or would you prefer visuals and script cues for this one first? 5. The body already knows, trusting the wisdom within. I used to think I needed to fix everything. Every ache, every blemish, every sign of age felt like something I had to fight. I'd reach for the lotion, the soap, the sponge, anything to make my body feel more right. But there came a quiet morning, in the stillness just before dawn, when I looked in the mirror and asked myself a question I never had before. What if my body already knows what it's doing? What if my care is doing too much, not too little? It was the same morning I walked past a little forest near the temple. The wind barely moved. The leaves shimmered under a sleepy sky, and everything seemed at peace, untouched, yet perfectly alive. No one had trimmed the branches, no one had swept the path, and still, the earth was doing what it's always done. Restoring, breathing, balancing. It made me think, what if the body is more like that forest than we realize? Inside our skin lives something wondrous, a vast, unseen world we rarely hear about. It's called the microbiome. a quiet network of friendly bacteria, fungi, and microscopic guardians who keep us healthy. They don't speak, but they work endlessly. They don't shine, but they shield us. They help break down sweat, dead skin, and oils. They stand at the gate of our pores and defend us from intruders. And most of the time, we don't even notice they're there. But we disrupt them without knowing when we scrub too hard, wash too often, or pour chemicals down the drain of our own skin. It's like setting fire to the underbrush of a forest just to make it look cleaner. It may seem tidy for a while, but the balance is gone. I remember a man I once cared for during his recovery from illness. He had been in the habit of bathing twice a day, scalding water, heavy soaps, strong deodorants. "I like to be squeaky clean," he said, chuckling. But his skin had turned dry and tight, flaking with every movement. He didn't feel clean anymore. He felt raw, vulnerable, stripped. Together, we tried something new. We paused the daily showers. We switched to lukewarm cloth wipes, natural oils, and no soaps unless needed. At first, he grumbled. "Feels like I'm cheating," he said. But within 2 weeks, the change was clear. His skin began to glow again, not with youth, but with calm. "I feel like I'm wearing me again," he whispered one evening. And then he smiled, as if that was the first time he'd said something kind to his body in years. Our skin, like the forest floor, is not meant to be bleached and burned. It's alive, a living, breathing ecosystem. And the more we try to control it, the more it pushes back. Can we trust it instead? Trust that the body has a rhythm, that it sloughs off what no longer serves, that its oils, once feared, are not filth but nourishment, that its warmth is not something to sterilize, but to honor. In Buddhist practice, we're taught to observe without judgment, to witness the breath, the thoughts, the sensations just as they are, not to fix them, not to cling to them, but to recognize them as transient guests in the house of our being. What if we could treat our skin that way too? What if we stepped into the morning not with soap in hand, but with presence? What if we felt the warmth of a cloth against our cheek as a blessing, not a task? What if we allowed the natural processes of the body to unfold, instead of interrupting them with fear disguised as hygiene? I once heard a Zen teacher describe the body as the garden of the soul. And like any true garden, it doesn't need constant weeding. It needs space, light, time. There's humility in this way of caring. We stop trying to outsmart nature. We begin to walk with it, like an old friend whose wisdom we're just beginning to understand. There's a peace that comes when we let go of the harsh routines and embrace the gentle ones. When we stop trying to overpower the body and instead support it. It feels like coming home, not just to the skin, but to something deeper inside. So I ask you now, as gently as I can you trust your body more and interfere a little less? Can you give it room to be imperfect yet intelligent? Can you believe that doing less, bathing less, scrubbing less, fearing less, might actually bring more ease, more comfort, more harmony? Because your body is not a machine to be washed and polished. It is a forest, a river, a lotus pond at dawn. It knows how to clean itself. It knows how to heal. And more often than not, it's asking not for more action, but for less interruption. Maybe all we need to do now is listen. Would you like me to continue with the next chapter, or offer visuals and cues for this one first? 6. A new kind of clean where care becomes ceremony. I used to think hygiene had to feel like work, like something sharp-edged and exact. A checklist. Soap, scrub, rinse, repeat. There was a sense of duty in it, as if staying clean was a way to prove that I hadn't let myself go. But somewhere along the way, maybe around the time my knees started clicking more than the faucet, I began to wonder, what if staying clean could feel like staying connected? What if it could feel soft, even sacred? I remember the morning this realization truly landed. I had been helping care for an elderly friend named Uncle Ba, a retired teacher who had once stood tall before classrooms, but now shuffled gently from bed to chair. He used to insist on a full shower every morning. He said it made him feel ready for life. But after a long illness and a painful fall, showers became a source of dread. He looked at me once and said, almost ashamed, I'm scared to bathe, but I don't want to feel dirty. So we started something different. I brought him a warm basin of water, a soft towel, and a few drops of lavender oil. The air in the room shifted softer, slower. We sat together in the quiet morning light as I gently helped him cleanse his hands, his face, behind his ears. He smiled. It wasn't a wide grin. It was a quiet kind of thank you, one that came from being seen, being touched with respect, not just efficiency. Afterward, he changed into clean cotton clothes and said, "I feel new, not clean, new." That moment changed me, because hygiene is not just about removing dirt. It's about restoring dignity. It's about reminding someone, maybe even yourself, that you're still someone who deserves to feel well in your own skin. I think that's the heart of what Buddhist teachings have shown us all along. To treat the body not as a project to manage, but as a vessel of presence. A form that is fleeting, yes, but still worthy of tenderness. In that light, a revised hygiene ritual for older adults becomes less about keeping up and more about showing up. With gentleness, with awareness, with a kind of slowness that makes even a small moment feel whole. Maybe it looks like this: a sponge bath in the morning, not rushed but done with care. Just the parts of the body that need attention. Warm cloth, slow strokes, breathing in and out. You're not scrubbing away impurity. You're greeting yourself. A fresh shirt, light pants, clean socks, fabrics that feel like kindness on your skin. Not stiff, not synthetic. Just something soft and breathable, like the clothes a monk might wear in a quiet temple garden. Oral care, often overlooked, becomes a small ritual of its own. Not just brushing teeth, but tending to the breath. To the mouth that speaks, eats, smiles. A little rinse, a little floss, touch of mint. You're not just brushing. You're honoring the place where your words are born. Hair, even if thin or gray, gets combed with a kind hand. Nails checked and filed. Maybe a dab of coconut oil on dry spots. You could even finish with a few drops of essential oil. Lavender, sandalwood, or whatever scent makes you feel a little more like yourself. None of this is dramatic. It doesn't take hours, but it shifts the energy. You're not doing it because you have to. You're doing it because your body is still a place worth showing love to. When we move away from the idea that full showers are the only way to be clean, we make space for new kinds of self-care. Ones that are safer, gentler, more sustainable. And let's be honest, this isn't about giving up. It's about growing into a new rhythm. One that honors where you are now, not where you were 20 years ago. In psychology, they call this adaptive identity. In Buddhism, it's called right view. The willingness to see clearly and compassionately without clinging to what used to be. I remember a lovely old woman named Han who lived alone in a small apartment filled with incense, books, and birds. She told me her hygiene routine was simple. Every morning she wiped her face with rose water, changed into clean clothes, and sat in the sun with a cup of tea. "If I smell good to the birds," she said with a twinkle in her eye, "I'm probably fine." And you know what? She was more than fine. She was radiant. She didn't shower every day, but her presence was clean, clear, kind. So if you're struggling with the idea of bathing less, please hear this. You are not neglecting yourself. You are evolving your care. You are listening to what your body actually needs, not what the world expects. A daily shower might have once been your anchor. Now, your anchor can be presence. It can be a bowl of water, a warm towel, a fresh shirt, a moment of stillness. You are not falling behind. You are falling into grace. And in that grace, hygiene becomes something deeper. It becomes an act of mindfulness, of loving kindness, of remembering, this body is my home. I will care for it gently, not out of fear, but out of love. There is beauty in that. There is freedom in that. And there is profound dignity in doing less with more presence. Would you like me to continue with the next section? Or would you like visual suggestions for this one first? 7. More than clean, honoring the aging body from the inside out. I used to think cleanliness was a badge we had to wear to earn our place in the world. If you were clean, you were acceptable. If you smelled good, looked tidy, felt fresh, people would treat you with more care. I believed that for a long time. But then, one quiet afternoon in a temple garden, I watched a moment unfold that changed everything I thought I knew about dignity. It was an old monk, small and fragile, slowly making his way down the path with the help of a young attendant. A novice, maybe 17 or 18 years old. The old monk moved like a leaf in slow wind. Every step was careful, tender. The younger monk held his elbow, not to steer him, but simply to be there if needed. When they reached the stone bench near the lotus pond, the old monk sat, and the younger one knelt beside him. He pulled out a soft cloth, dipped it in warm water he had carried in a brass bowl, and began gently wiping the elder's face. Then his hands, then behind his ears.
No rus, no cuernis.
Just care. I remember the elder monk smiled softly and said, "I'm still me, aren't I?" The boy nodded without words, and somehow I knew that in that moment, the elder didn't feel diminished by needing help. He felt seen, held, worthy. That's when I realized cleanliness is not what gives us our worth. Dignity isn't something we earn with soap or water. It lives in how we treat ourselves and how others treat us when we are at our most vulnerable. In Buddhist practice, there's something profoundly sacred about tending to the body, not out of attachment or vanity, but out of reverence. The body is impermanent, yes, but while it is with us, it is the vessel of our practice, our presence, our love. How we treat this vessel reflects how awake we are to life itself. And yet, in the modern world, we often reduce self-care to routines: shower, deodorant, mouthwash, check. If you follow the rules, you're clean. If you don't, you're failing. But that's not compassion. That's pressure in disguise. Especially as we age, these rituals can start to feel like impossible standards. The joints ache. The tub becomes a risk. The energy just isn't there. And suddenly, something as simple as bathing becomes a source of shame. But what if we let go of the shame? What if we stopped believing that being spotless means being lovable? What if we redefined self-care not as an obligation, but as a quiet way of saying, I still matter. Even now, even like this. One of the most beautiful things I've ever heard came from a woman named Lynn, who cared for her father during the last year of his life. He could no longer walk without help. Some days he couldn't speak, but every morning, she would help him wash his face with a warm cloth, gently massage his hands, comb his thinning hair, and then, this part always makes me pause. She would sit with him for a while, holding his hands in silence. I used to think that cleaning him was just about hygiene, she told me. But over time, it became my way of loving him. I wasn't washing off dirt. I was reminding him that he was still beautiful. There is a holiness in that. And when we care for ourselves in that same way, whether we are aging, recovering, or simply worn down, we reclaim something sacred. We remember that the body does not have to be perfect to be precious. That the scent of lavender oil on your wrist, the softness of fresh clothes, the stillness of a sponge bath under a morning window, these are not acts of maintenance. They are acts of reverence. They say, this body has carried me through decades, through joy and loss, through mornings full of ambition and nights full of aching. This body has bent, stretched, wept, laughed, healed. I will not shame it now. I will love it gently. And in that gentleness, something begins to shift. We begin to measure our worth not by the number of showers we've taken this week, but by how kindly we speak to ourselves when we feel tired. We begin to let go of external rules and listen instead to internal rhythms. Some days we may want the full ritual. Other days we may only want a fresh shirt, a little oil behind the ears, and a few quiet breaths. And both are enough. Because self-care is not about appearing put together. It's about being present with what is. About saying to ourselves, in the language of warm water and soft cloth, I see you. I accept you. I honor you. When we treat the aging body this way, with respect instead of resistance, with grace instead of guilt, we return home to ourselves. We realize we were never unclean to begin with. Only tired, only human, and infinitely worthy of love, just as we are. Would you like me to continue with the final chapter, or offer image directions for this one before we close the video with a gentle, reflective ending? You see, sometimes care isn't about doing more, it's about doing less with love. Bathing less doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go of pressure, of harsh habits, of the old idea that we must always be spotless to be worthy. The body isn't breaking. It's blossoming into a new season, like a ripened fruit, like a lotus opening in the soft morning light. When we treat our skin not as a problem to fix, but as a temple to honor, something shifts. So let me ask you, what's one gentle thing you can do for your body today? Not out of obligation, but out of reverence? Share it with me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections. And if this video touched something true inside you, consider subscribing. Not just for more content, but to stay connected on a path of presence, compassion, and awakening. I'll see you in the next video where we continue learning to care, not just for our bodies, but for our whole being.